Hello, and welcome to another episode of Apokolips Production's Why Should I Care About? My name is Erebus.
I'm BaconLord.
And I'm Yorongoth.
And on today's episode, we're going to tell you why you should care about buffs, debuffs, and immunities in DC Legends. So, to start off, I want to tell you that buffs, debuffs, and immunities are the core of gameplay in DC Legends. Yes, you need to be hitting your enemies. Yes, you need to be trying to resist some damage. But more than anything, you need to be buffing and debuffing, because it's the key to victory.
It's a bold statement, but it's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
My partner has looked over my shoulder as I've played this game before, and he's commented and just been like, that is so many buffs. How do you even keep track of it all? One thing to note, you can keep track of them during battle by pressing down on the toon that you want to see, and that will pop up a little window that will show every single buff and debuff that they have currently stacked on them. One thing I do also want to mention is that there are abilities in the game that will get rid of buffs, and theoretically, it's a last on, first off thing. I'm not entirely certain that's the case, but that is what I've been told since I started the game. But one thing to keep in mind is that anything that says that it gets rid of immunities will only remove buffs with immunity in the name. So we're going to go ahead and go through all of the buffs and debuffs in the game. There is a type of buff that is known as an empowered buff. We will mention those throughout. There are only a few that have them. Essentially what it means is that it has twice the effect as a regular buff or debuff.
Yeah, it's a very fun variety of buff there, the empowered buffs.
Yeah.
Alright, so I'm going to kick us off with the agility buffs. You have both agility up and down. So just to clarify something with each of these buffs and debuffs as we're going through, a buff is characterized by the green icon on a character, and a debuff is characterized by the red icon underneath their health bar. So agility up and agility down, as well as the empowered form, which has made its way into gameplay more recently again. Agility up defends you from physical attacks. It increases your, not necessarily immunity, but your resistance to physical attacks from characters, because some characters will deal special damage and some will deal physical damage, and the way you know is by, in a character's attack description, it will not specify if it's physical damage, but if it's special damage, it will always say special damage. But agility up increases your tolerance for physical damage, and agility down lessens your tolerance and makes physical attacks hit you harder. And empowered does it double both directions.
So the next ability the next buff we're going to talk about is awareness and damage immunity. These are only come in the buff format. Awareness is essentially a one-time damage immunity, whereas damage immunity is permanent until it gets dispelled or wears off based on your turn coming up.
Moving on, crit chance up, down, and immunity. Essentially, the buff version is a crit chance up, which makes it more likely that you're going to get a crit. Crit chance down is a debuff, you're less likely to get a crit. And crit immunity is something that protects you from being crit upon. There are a few toons now that will just give a permanent crit immunity to a few leaders in particular, and some other toons that will lessen the chance of getting crit. That's how crits work.
Say crit one more time.
Crit.
Thank you. Leading that into crit damage up and down. Critical damage up and critical damage down increase or decrease the amount of damage that you're going to do when you have a critical hit. So characters that have high crit chance usually have critical hits more often, and crit damage will increase the damage threshold that you're already doing. So if it's 150% chance at base, the damage that you're going to do increases to like a 2. So say if you have crit damage up, you're going to do 200% more damage as opposed to 150, and so on, depending on how many you have.
Alright, moving on to Doom and Death Immunity. Doom is a debuff that you get, which I'm not sure exactly how many tunes it lasts. Do either of you guys know off the top of your head before it procs?
4 turns.
So it procs after 4 turns and does an exuberant amount of damage, generally killing you if you don't have some kind of death immunity, which is the next the next buff we're going to talk about. And essentially that protects you from dying once your HP reaches 0 on whatever character has it.
Worth mentioning, the damage that Doom does is true damage. And that's not a term that I think we've used on this podcast before. It essentially is just flat damage that is a percentage of the character's health and does not take into account any defenses or agility
Doesn't worry
ups.
about agility up.
Right. So it's just flat HP damage directly to the character.
And it is 100%. It says 100% true damage. So if you have a full
on Doom
bar on Doom, sorry, Doom does, not death immunity. That'd be bad. Death immunity would be very broken. Doom does 100% true damage when it occurs after the 4th turn. So if you have no overheal, it's a guaranteed kill.
I think it bypasses shield too, right?
Mm-hmm. It ignores it ignores literally anything else other than death immunity and overheal. And even then, it takes you down just 100% from your overheal.
I think damage immunity can also get past it, right?
I've never tried.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that,
I've
but
never
I
seen
appreciate
it.
you guys knowing the actual numbers because I kind of did not, you know.
Well, I'm going to claim right here and now that damage immunity does stop it, and nobody tell me otherwise.
I like that mentality.
The confidence has me agreeing.
Excellent. All right, next on the list, debuff immunity and buff immunity. So debuff immunity is a buff, and buff immunity is a debuff. Essentially, if you have debuff immunity on your team, it means that you can't be inflicted with any of the other debuffs that we are talking about here, except for all the circumstances where things ignore debuff immunity now.
Yeah, except for the 15 exceptions to the rule.
Exactly. Thank you, Punchline and Dr. Poison. Buff immunity, on the other hand, prevents you from being able to put buffs on yourself. And as of yet, there is nothing that can break through buff immunity at the time of this recording.
Nope, nothing. Nothing off the top of my head. Oh well, moving
I
on
don't
to
think so.
Enrage. Enrage and Enrage immunity are, well, Enrage you need to understand for Enrage immunity. Enrage immunity means you can't get enraged. But what is Enrage? Enrage is a debuff that you put on, generally speaking, the opposing team, with exceptions like Solomon Grundy, who enrages himself to do extra damage, but that's a totally different discussion for a Doom Talk one day. Enrage basically makes your character lose control, and you can't choose their next target or the ability. It only does their basic ability, and you don't get to pick the target. If a character is taunting, it will always pick the taunting character. If there are multiple taunting characters, it picks one of them. But if there's no taunting character, it will pick a random enemy to attack with their basic ability. So hopefully
Yep.
you've got a heavy hitter that's enraged, because if you have Desaad, you're screwed.
Basics do nothing.
My hatred of Desaad knows no bounds.
You can't say that on a New Gods podcast.
just his basic ability.
Okay. Well, now that his 3 is broken again, he is kind of trash.
You can't say that on a New Gods podcast.
I feel like I heard that somewhere before.
You're having deja vu.
Yes. The other thing about Enrage, there are a few characters that will put it on other members of your team, like Cersei and Atrocitus. Atrocitus is one of the only tunes that actually gives a benefit for an Enrage on your team, because he actually buffs characters that are enraged. And then Cersei, she just raises people with permanent enrage.
They're like a mind controlled dead body
Exactly.
at that point.
Exactly.
Moving on to evasion up and down. Essentially what evasion up is it makes it less likely for an individual to be hit by, abilities unless they're a can't miss ability. And evasion down makes it more likely to be hit. Evasion up is the buff variety and evasion down is the debuff variety. Yeah.
Very similarly, the next one is hit chance up and down, which instead of you becoming more evasive, you become more likely to hit people who are evading.
It's almost like those buffs are designed to counter each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still, an enemy Harley Quinn is going to evade no matter how many hit chance ups you have.
It's true. I would say that's a segue, but it's absolutely not. Well, it is a segue. She's got intelligence up for no reason. Intelligence ups and downs, as well as their empowered form. They are similar to how I described agility ups earlier as defending against physical damage. Intelligence ups and downs affect special damage, both how much you give and how much you receive. It's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. So intelligence up, the buff version, increases how much special damage you can deal out and how much special damage you can resist when you're taking it. Similarly, intelligence down increases the amount of special damage that you're going to take and decreases how much special damage you can deal out. And then the empowered version, which has been recently introduced to the game, it does double per every other empowered that we have mentioned so far.
Also worth mentioning, intelligence up and down also affect healing.
Oh, yeah.
Which can make it odd when you have a physical character who can do healing, because if they aren't getting int ups, then their healing is kind of static.
Yep, that's true. That is a very fair point. The next buffs we're going to be talking about are Invisibility, Taunt, and True Sight, all of which are considered buffs. However, some of them, such as Taunt, are applied in a debuff scenario, but that's a specific example for a future time. Basically, Invisibility modifies some characters' abilities, like we talked about with Batman last week. It also makes it to where you can't be targeted by most basic attacks unless the individual has True Sight, which allows you to attack even invisible targets. And it also bypasses Taunt, which is the other ability. And basically that makes it to where your character has to hit them with an ability unless they have True Sight, which obviously bypasses it.
It's also worth noting that an invisible character who is the last character standing on a team can still be targeted by single target attacks. However, you cannot call an assist on an invisible target unless the person being called to assist has True Sight.
There's a lot of conditional things about to happen with that little trio.
There are, because also, if somebody has both Taunt and Invisibility, the Taunt takes precedent.
Yeah, it bypasses the invisibility.
Yes.
Yay!
So. I don't know how much of that is a mistake in coding versus intentional.
No, it's intentional. It was addressed a couple years back.
Oh, awesome. See, this is why having somebody who's been around since the game's start is wonderful.
Exactly. Hard facts.
So the next one that we wanted to talk about are mends, bleeds, and disease. So mends and bleeds are kind of the opposites of each other. They do true healing or true damage. I believe both of them are about 3% damage or healing.
We're not going to get into the percentages. We can't do that.
We are absolutely not getting into the percentages for disease because it has changed since it got released. But essentially what disease is, it's very similar to a bleed. It does true damage, but instead of to a single target, it does damage to the entire team. And it has a percentage chance to spread to other team members who take damage from the disease. So if you stack 10 diseases on one character, when their turn starts, their entire team will take damage, and then each one of those stacks, or each individual disease in the stack, has a set percent chance to spread to every other member of that team.
It's my favorite debuff.
It can get out of hand so fast.
Absolutely.
That's why disease themes are so scary.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to silence. Silence is similar to Enrage in the sense that it kind of negates a lot of the choice for you. You only get to use your basic ability. So if you're Desaad, again, you are screwed because you got nothing. But Silence is a debuff that is applied to your opponent, and it just basically says you can only do your basic ability, but unlike Enrage, you get to choose your opponent. So you can choose any of the available opponents to hit, assuming they don't have Taunt or Invisibility littered throughout, but you only can choose your basic ability. So it's kind of you win some, you lose some there.
Yeah. All right, and then the next series of buffs and debuffs we're going to be talking about are speed up and down, which are exactly as their name implies. Speed up is the buff variety, and it increases how often your character gets their turn. And speed down is the debuff variety, and it makes it to where there's more time in between turns for that specific character.
There's also turn meter reset on some character abilities, which act as like a soft or a hard reset on the turn meter, similar to how speed down kind of slows them down.
Exactly.
Yeah, so speed up and down affects the rate at which your turn meter actually fills versus turn meter manipulation, which is not in and of itself a buff or debuff, but will just take a chunk or add a chunk to your turn meter flat out.
That's a whole episode.
It is! Adding that to the list.
Black Flash is my favorite for speed manipulation, just because I like his 2.
Oh yeah, his 2 is really good. Yeah. We'll talk about that in the future episode.
Yeah. Not important here.
All right, next up, stamina up and down. This essentially changes the amount of HP your character has. So a stamina up will make it so that your characters are a bit beefier, whereas stamina down makes it so that they have less health and can be knocked over even by Desad's basic. And there is an empowered version of the stamina up and down that you can find on quite a number of you can find the stamina up empowered quite a number of taunters these days.
Who has stamina down?
I don't know.
We're sure that we'll look at that later. We'll find an episode on that for 2.
I took this entire list from the DCL toolkit, so blame them and not me. No, they are a wonderful resource. I very much love them, and please don't be mean to them.
Or they'll stop doing this for us. Well, I'm gonna do in between the next one. I'm gonna look up who has stamina down, because that's gonna bug me for a while. But moving on, I'm gonna go into strength up and strength down, which, as the name implies, takes your strength up or takes your strength down. It increases the amount of physical damage you can deal. So similar to how agility up and down affects how much damage you're going to take from physical attacks, strength up increases how much physical attack you can do, or decreases the amount of physical attack you can do. And then there's the empowered version, which is very popular in the game nowadays, and you can double that.
Yes. So the next abilities we're going to be talking about are stuns and stun immunity. As the name implies, if the stun is the debuff variety, and it makes it to where that toon is unable to act unless they have some ability that makes it to where they are unable to be stunned, or have the stun immunity buff on them, which prevents stun, and they generally only last a turn.
Although there is Impulse, who can make it a 2-turn stun, which broke everybody's brains when that first came out.
That was such a cool
absolutely.
moment. They were like, 2 turns? What? No way!
Yeah.
Right?
Now we've got characters that just stun every turn.
Yeah. So the last 2 are a bit trickier, and so I wanted to save them for last and cover them together. It's Affinity Power up and down, and Affinity Resist up and down. So Affinity Power up and down. Basics of DCL. Every character has an affinity. It's either a physical toon, a mystical toon, or an energy toon. Red, blue, and green, respectively. Took me the longest time to figure out that red did not beat green, because I absolutely was looking at it like Pokemon typings and was like, oh, fire beats grass. No, my friends. In this game, grass beats fire. So what Affinity Power up and down does is it increases or decreases the amount of damage that a toon does to an enemy that they would get bonus damage on. So if you have a red physical character, an Affinity Power up makes it so that you do more damage against a blue mystical toon. What Affinity Resist does is it boosts your ability to resist the affinity that you are already strong to. So a red physical toon would take even less damage incoming from a blue mystical toon. It's one of those things that you kind of just have to sit down and think about a bit, it makes sense eventually, but it can be a little bit hard to be like, okay, my affinity power is going up, so I'm going to do more damage against other tombs. No, you're only going to do more damage against a tomb that you're already doing more damage to.
You gotta really sit and rack your brain on these two, because they're so difficult. I don't know why we did them. They're so difficult to understand, and I don't ever pick a tomb because of their affinity power up or power or resist up and down. I've never sat there going, this is gonna be a good tomb because of these buffs. These are the ones I like.
That's why I like, is it Supergirl that does it?
Yes,
that has them?
Supergirl's rework did that.
Yeah, she's the only tune I can think of that I'm like, that I specifically think of these buffs.
The other one would be Freddy Shazam, because with his new rework, he has a lot of things that play with this affinity power and affinity resist, and it just makes him one of the most confusing characters in the entire game.
Yeah.
Because you'll go in and you'll hit somebody, and then the next turn you'll do more damage or they'll do less damage, and it's like, why did that happen?
Not sure why. I had to watch the 2D episode on Freddy 3 times to get it. I had to keep rewinding and hear him explain it over and over because I just didn't get it. I still don't get it today, so I just kind of said I'm just not going to use Freddy. That's where I'm at. Just gonna.
No, I mean
ignore him.
That's valid. That makes sense.
No, this is a buff and debuff set that confuses even other podcasters in the DCL sphere. Even the people who are end game podcasters don't always always have to think about it. So,
yeah. And we thought Empowered was confusing when that happened,
right?
For some reason.
It's just times 2. But yeah, so affinity power and affinity resist up and down. Supergirl makes it worth it.
Supergirl makes it worth it. That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
And I have the thrilling conclusion to the epic saga called BaconLord looking up Stamina Down. I've got it right here on DCL Toolkit. Stamina Down does not exist. Yet. But when it happens, theoretically it will decrease the amount of health you have. But until that day, it's just stamina up.
Stamina down at all doesn't exist?
Does not exist, because you know how they have but you can sort your characters by who has what. It's got the buff and debuff. So if you go to the debuff section, it goes, so if you go to the buff section, it's speed up, stamina up, strength up. And if you go to the debuff section, it's just speed down, strength down. That's it. There's no stamina.
It's also interesting that it only lists empowered intelligence down.
Mm-hmm. Because there isn't an empowered
strength.
Nope. All the other ones don't have it yet. It's a yet.
It is a yet.
But yeah,
it's all coming.
The only empowereds are agility, stamina, and strength, and intelligence down. So 3 ups, 1 down.
So yes, listeners, we talked about the empowered strength downs and empowered stamina downs to future-proof this episode, not because we just simply didn't realize that they didn't exist already.
Yes, this will stand the test of time. That's what we're going for, right?
Exactly, yeah, for sure. Hard facts. Undisputable.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you both for joining me, and thank you, listeners, for joining us. As always, you can find us online at apokolipspod.com and on Twitter at apokolipspod. There you will also find links to join our Discord and to find our YouTube channel. So please take a look.
Or else.
Or else. All right. Have a great day, and thank you all.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Sayonara, suckers.